Okay, so I am recording through the ASM account. So right now, the chat and anything that is going on in our current meet that everyone is live in is not going to be part of the recording. Okay. So it's just going to show up as just me and the screen showing up in the recording, just so everybody knows. Okay. So we're all logged in now, hopefully. We got a chance yesterday to kind of just play around a little bit briefly in PlayCanvas. Today we are going to start making a very simple game using the engine. Okay. So just so we can kind of see how to navigate things a little bit here. If we want to get back to this kind of home screen here, we can always click on PlayCanvas. Right, that's going to load this back up. Now, once we're in this, our default view is this kind of just feed. My general sense is usually there's not a lot of useful or interesting things going on here. However, it does give us these links on the side to the forum and to the docs. We're going to talk more about these in the future. But when you're having issues in the future, you're trying to figure out how to do something, something's not working, a feature you're trying to implement, you're not sure about how to go about it, these are great places to go for that. Okay? The forum, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people have used something like this before. It's all people asking questions and being able to hopefully get answers to your questions. Okay? So you can always come in here and search for a specific problem, see if somebody already has answered it, has already had a similar problem, or if you can ask a question yourself. Now we also have the docs over here. Now the docs have the manual, so you can look things up. They also have a tutorials section. So they do have some tutorials that will go into things that we are not going to learn, or at least I'm not going to teach you as a part of class. So some things you'll be able to pick some things up in here that I didn't teach to the whole large group. Okay? So just so you have those for future reference. Now, from here, we also have, the most important part is this projects tab right here. So this is where we're all going to go right now. So this is where all your games that you are working on are going to be located. So you can see I have a lot here because a lot of all the games from the spring were also shared with me. So as you're going through these and you're making your games, you're going to be able to share your games across accounts with multiple people so that more than one person can edit them, which of course is how we're going to be working on our teams together. Okay, so from this point here, we are going to go ahead and click this new button up here in the top corner. This is going to get us started on a new project. We're going to start a blank project, but they do have these other two options here. Ones we're not going to be using. We're just going to be using blank projects. And we're going to give it a name. The name for this project is not very important. I'm just going to call this, I'm going to call it starter game. This is just kind of a learning place, right? The place we're going to go to kind of learn some things, test things out. This isn't going to be your group game, okay? So you don't have to worry about what you call it or anything. Now, you can enter a description. We don't need to. What you'll see here is that all of our games are going to be technically public because we're using free accounts. You can only make a game totally private if you have a paid account on here. So you're going to select a blank project, put a name in, and then you can go ahead and click the Create button down here. And that's going to create a brand new game for us. It's going to now look just like how it looked yesterday when we opened up a game to kind of play around with. We have this overview, and then we also have some settings. We'll look more at these settings in the future, but here you can do things like upload a thumbnail or whatever artwork you want to use for the icon on the website, as well as being able to add a description. You can change that here. This is also where you'll be able to add in collaborators to add more people to your projects. Okay. All right, now we're going to go ahead and we are going to open up our editor. When we bring the editor up, it's going to bring up that scenes menu. So this is the same way it looked before when we opened up somebody else's game. Right now, it starts as with just one scene, and that scene does not currently have a name. It says untitled. So we can go ahead and open that scene up. Just click on it to open it up. And it's going to start us with just a very basic game. It's going to have a plane, which is a flat rectangle, as well as a cube, which is, of course, 3D. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit on this so you can see what I'm doing a little more. Resize this around a little bit. Okay. All right, so we can see that plane and our cube in the center of our kind of area here. Now, remember, as we talked about yesterday, we also have our toolbar on the side with different tools. So things like rotate, scale. We're going to be able to do some of these without going to the tools as well, as you'll see. And we have the hierarchy. So this is showing everything that's currently in our game. So the first thing at the top you'll notice is that we have something called root. Root is kind of just like a container that everything else is going to fall into. So you can change the name of this if you want to, or you can, you can move things around in a little bit of a different way. But root is kind of the general overall kind of container that's going to hold on to everything in your game. So our starter game here has a camera. If I select that, I get a kind of preview view of what it's going to look like right now from the camera starting position. A light source. Then I have my box and my plane. If I go ahead and hit play right now, you're going to see it loads up. I have my plane, I see my box, but nothing else is going on, right? I can't move anything. I can't have no controls, nothing else going on here. Go ahead and close that out. Okay, but you will notice when I hit play, my camera view actually did match exactly as it did here. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is learn how to move some things around in our game. So let's say I want to move my box in the middle here. There's actually a few ways I can do it. Those toolbars over here on the side, right? So we can select different tools. Then we can select, right now it's on the default one, it's called Translate, which is essentially a move tool. Then I can select my box. Now I can select my box either by clicking on it in the hierarchy, selecting it here, or I can just click on it in my main window in the middle. Okay. Now when I click on that, I get, if I have my translate tool out, which is the default tool, I get these 3 arrows. Okay, so these are going to allow me to move my object that I have selected on the 3 axes that we're working with, right? So we're working in 3D, so we can move things on our X, our Y, or our Z axis. And we can actually just click and drag these arrows to move our object around. Which you'll also notice when you move your object, because I have my box selected, it pulls up the properties for my box over here on the right-hand side. And it actually will show me the position of my box. So I can see when I move it that this position is actually changing. So you can, oops, I didn't even mean to do that. So you can actually type in numbers over here. So if you know you want it at like right in the middle again, I can come in here and I can type in 0 for my X. Hit enter. I can type in 0 for my Z. Now, one thing that can be a little bit confusing here is our Y. People probably think of X and Y, your grid, you're thinking about that as being flat. In PlayCanvas, at least, our Y is our vertical axis. This is up and down. So you can see when I drag that green arrow up, my Y axis is the one that's changing. All right, so as we just saw, we can type in the numbers here. So I have position, rotation, and scale. We also have those tools over here on the toolbar. So we have a rotate tool. If I want to rotate something, I'm actually not going to rotate this right now, but I could, right? I can see the X is here is changed. Before I can rotate on any 3 sides. If I want to reset this, again, I can come over here and I can just put 0 in for everything I just rotated at. Now you do the same thing with my scale. So scale is going to change your size. And again, it's really easy to reset. I can come over here, 0. Oh, not 0, 1. If I do 0, that's going to be nothing. 1, 1, and 1. Right, so when I say 1, you can think about that in terms of like 100%. So 1 meaning that's the starting size of this object. Okay, so if you want to make it twice the size and I want to type it in, I could make all of these 2. Right, now my box would be twice as big as it was before. Okay, so now I've learned to move around my cube a little bit, my box. We're going to add a second shape to this game, and we're going to add a sphere. Before we add the sphere, we're going to come over to our hierarchy over here, and we are going to select our root. So I want everybody to make sure you click on your roots. Also, as we're going through this, make sure if at any points you need me to do something over again, you need to like what was going on there, you can either put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and you can ask a question at any point. Feel free to interrupt me. I'm not on a train barreling at 200 miles an hour here. I can stop at any point. I can pause. Okay. All right, so we're going to come over to our hierarchy, and you want to make sure you have the root selected. Now, the reason I want to select my root is because when I add an object, I want to make sure that it's in the main container of my game. So I'm going to make sure it's under root. If I have something else like let's say I had my box selected it and I add my sphere, the sphere and the box are going to be kind of linked together. Okay? So I want to make sure that this is a totally separate object just in the main container of my game. So I want to make sure I have root selected. Then at the very top up here, right next to the word hierarchy, there's a plus button. When I hover my mouse, it says add entity. I'm going to hit that plus, and I'm going to go down to where it says primitive. So a primitive is just a very simple model that I can load up that's just going to have a very simple shape. So you can see they have a box, a capsule, which is kind of like a pill shaped, a cone, a cylinder, a plane, which again is just completely flat, like we have on our ground for our sample game here, and a sphere. So we're going to add a sphere to our game. And it should show up, if you had root selected, it will now show up at the bottom of your list. Okay? Now what I want you to do, after you have your sphere selected, you've had it created, I'm going to go back and I want to make sure I'm going to take out my translate tool so I can move this. And I'm going to just lift it up a little bit because it starts and it's kind of like embedded in the plane. It's kind of like almost a part of it. I want to make sure it's raised up a little bit. It can actually be floating in the air. And I don't want it to be overlapping with my box here, so I'm going to just move it over a little bit. Doesn't matter the exact position, as long as it's not directly on top of the box. And I want it floating in the air. Okay. Everybody got this? Anybody need to pause, show anything over again? Have any questions at this point? Okay. All right. So our next step now is we can actually see what this looks like, right? I can go ahead and hit my play. And I can see, again, I still have a very static world. My sphere is floating in the air. It's floating above the ground. My cube is floating as well. Nothing's falling. I can't move anything. My camera doesn't move. So I have to do a little bit more to this to actually make things interactive. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that my sphere here is going to be able to have gravity interact with it. So it's going to actually be able to move on its own. Before we add controls, I need to make sure it can actually fall. And it's going to be able to collide and hit the ground. Okay? So in order to do that, I'm going to have to add a couple things to both my sphere and to my ground, my plane down here. So I'm going to be adding two things to it. The first one is called a rigid body. The rigid body is going to kind of describe how is this thing interacting with the world around it. Is it affected by physics? Is it supposed to be kind of just sturdy, stable, not moving? Okay, can it float in the air, right? So that's good. That's called a rigid body. The other thing I need to do is I need to add what's called a collision. And the collision is going to determine where other things are going to be able to collide with it. So just because the model is spherical and it looks like this doesn't necessarily mean that my collision box will be. And I have to tell it if I want that to be the case. Okay? So we're going to add both of these things to both our ground, our plane, and to our sphere here. Okay? I'm going to go ahead and do my sphere first. The order doesn't really matter in this case, but I'll do my sphere first. We're going to be doing it very similarly to both of these. Okay, but there are going to be a couple of differences of how we add them. There's going to be a couple setting differences. So I'm going to do my sphere first. So make sure you have your sphere selected. I'm going to look over here at these properties. And what you'll see on the properties here is right now we have all that stuff at the top that we looked at. These are our entity settings, like our position, rotation, scale, and we have our model settings. Okay. When we get a little bit further, model settings are where we're going to do things like be able to add some color to this or add a texture to our material. All right, so we're going to go to this big button right at the bottom of our entity settings here that says Add Components. And it's going to give us all kinds of options here. And we're going to go to those two that I talked about, which are rigid body and collision. So I'm going to do my collision first, since it's higher up on the list here. Doesn't matter the order we actually add them in, as long as we have them both. So I'm going to go to collision first. And I want to change this collision type from box, and I actually can see it right now. It's kind of showing up as a green box around my sphere. I'm just going to change it from box to sphere. Now what you'll see here is right below the type, it has a radius. And a radius is set to 0.5. Okay? So this needs to be half of whatever your scale is. So right now our scale is 1. Excuse me. Get some water real fast here. Yes. Yeah, so we're going to hold off on that. I think this should work without ammo, but if we need to load it, we'll load it up. I think at least what we're doing should work, but I could be wrong. I might need to rethink that. if we need to load it, we'll load it. Okay, so we have our radius, which is half of what our scale is. So if we end up changing the size of our sphere to 2, you make it twice as big as it was. You want to make sure that your radius then would be 1, right? So radius, remember, you're half the. Everyone knows what a radius is for math class. Hopefully, like half from the center to the end point, right? So that's going to be half of whatever your size or your scale is. Okay. So right now, as long as your scale is 1, you don't need to change your radius at all. Okay. Now we're going to come and we're going to add our other component. And I'm going to go down to our rigid body. Now, when you add that, it actually is going to add to the bottom. So you're going to need to scroll down to see the settings for that. And it's going to show up down here towards the bottom. Now, there are several types of rigid bodies. There's static, dynamic, and kinematic. Okay. So static is going to mean that it's not going to move. It's going to be static, meaning it's unchanging, right? Dynamic is going to have regular basic physics work on it. Kinematics can move, but they're kind of specialized. So we're not going to use kinematic a whole lot. We'll talk about it more if we do have to use it. But right now, just kind of know it's kind of a specialized thing that we're not really going to do very, very much. For ours, we want our to be able to fall, so we want to choose dynamic. Now, from dynamic, you do get several settings here, such as like mass, right? This is going to be how heavy that is. And there's several other things we're not going to get into at the moment, at least. This linear factor, angular factor, friction. So if you know what friction is, it's how two objects rub together. So some of these things you'll be able to see, settings you'll be able to change once we get things working. Okay. Now if we hit play right now, nothing is going to change yet. Okay. We have to do a little bit more to this in order to get it to actually change. Yeah. Actually, you know what? Let's just go ahead and import the ammo where it says ammo module not found. Everybody can go ahead and hit that. It might take a minute here. It's going to create, if you'll see when it's done, it'll create a new, well, this will go away, but also the folder is going to show up down here in your assets. It says ammo. We might as well load it now. Okay, so now we've got this part done. I'm gonna give everybody a second here in case they have to wait for anything, or if you have any questions, we'll just hold on to just a second. All right, everybody good? Okay, so now we're gonna do something pretty similar to our plane down here. So I'm going to select my plane, so I can either click on it in my hierarchy, or I can just click on it in my main view here. And I'm going to do those same two things to my plane. So I'm going to add a collision. Now, when I add a collision, I am going to leave it on box. There is a setting for a way to change this a little bit, but I'm not going to mess with some of these other settings here. So remember, our half extents are going to be very similar to what our radius is. Okay, so these are going to be half what our scale is up here. So I can see my scale of my plane is 8 on my X. So on my half extent down here, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to make it 4. And you're going to see now that green box should extend across your plane in this direction. Then I'm actually going to skip the Y for the moment. I'm going to go to my Z. And I'm going to do the same thing for my Z. So my Z was 8, so I'm going to go ahead and click 4. All right, now one thing you're going to see is a little bit weird is that right now on your scale for your Y, it's set to 1, but the half extent is half, which is half of 1. And yet the box is way bigger on your Y. You can see it really poking out way beyond where your plane is. Okay. Now that has to do with the fact that this is a plane, which means that it is flat. So it's not a box the same way that our box right here is. A plane is designed to be flat. So it really can't have any sort of real depth on the Y. So no matter what the half extent here, it's going to be probably a little bit too big. So we're going to go ahead to our half extent for our Y. I'm just going to make it 0.1. So it's going to be kind of a little bit off. Now, if I were going to design this myself, I would probably delete the plane and I would just put a box in and make it really short on the Y myself. I would not leave that plane in there if I was going to be designing a game. I would not use a plane as my ground. But we'll leave it there for now. All right. Now we're going to come back to add component. And I'm going to do just like I did on my sphere. I'm going to add that second part I needed, which is the rigid body. And again, that's going to add that component down at the bottom here. All right, so this one, we are going to leave it static because we want our ground to be staying stable. We don't want our plane here to just keep falling as well, right? We want it to stay where it is. We want our ball to be able to fall and interact with it. So we actually are going to leave this one on static, and we don't have to worry about, with static you get far less options, right? They do give us friction and this thing called restitution, which is kind of like the bounciness, but those are the only two settings we have. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and hit play, and you're going to see if everything is set correctly, your ball should fall down. Now you can just reload this tab if you want to see it again. Right now, that's all it does. Or you can hit close it and hit play again. But now we have a ball in our game, and it falls down. All right. Does anybody have any questions about at this point, or need me to go over any of part that I just showed you again at this point? Okay, we're gonna do one more thing quickly today. I know I went a little bit over time. I wanted to give you some time for more time for self-exploration today at the end. So we're a little bit over the time that I had planned, but I want to at least be able to show you how to make things look a little more interesting in this game as well. So we are going to add a material to this game. And we're going to create a material which is going to let us actually add a little bit of color so that not everything just all looks the same. Okay, we're not going to get to adding scripts today. We'll do that next time, just because we're out of time today. But we will at least add a material so things like look a little more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to go down to my assets section, so the section on the bottom. So we haven't actually done anything with this yet. So this is where I'll go when I have any files I want to add. So we're going to be using this a lot next week when we are adding onto this game. But the first thing we're going to add in here is something we're going to generate from within PlayCanvas. So normally we could actually upload things in here if we have something downloaded or saved. But we can also create things in here using this assets right here. Okay, right where it says asset, there's a plus next to it. So I'm going to go ahead and click that plus. And I am going to add a material. So I'm down again. I'm going to show you again if you need to see it again. I'm down in this asset section in the bottom. I'm going to click that plus, and I'm going to go to where it says material. When I do that, I'll see this new material show up. It looks kind of, again, it looks kind of spherical. That's just how your materials are going to display. That doesn't mean they are spheres. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go and I'm going to give this a name. So I'm going to, in order to name it, you have to select it from your assets, and it'll pull up the properties on the side. And you'll see the first kind of field here says name. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. We're just going to use a basic color for this material. So whatever color you want to be able to use, you can just type that color and name here. I'm going to use green, but you can put in whatever color you want. So I'm going to name this green. So you just got to get a name in there. Then I'm going to scroll down. And if I want this material, there's a whole ton of settings under materials, okay? And there are ways to add in images and textures and things like that to this, lighting effects, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? But if I just want this to be a solid color, which is all we're going to be doing for today at least, I'm going to scroll down to where it says ambient. Oh, wait, actually, no, not ambient. Right, is it? No, diffuse. I'm sorry. Not ambient, diffuse. I'm going to go down to this diffuse section, and there is actually a color selector right here. So I'm going to click that color box, and then I can pick the color I want this material to be. So I got the, make sure when you're doing this, if you haven't used like a color selector before, sometimes I've noticed people do this. They'll slide the slider down on the side, but then they won't actually move the color picker inside of there. So make sure you're doing both of those parts to pick your color, okay? And you'll actually see the little color palette change right here. So whatever color you want to use, you can go ahead and pick that out, like that. And you'll see now in your assets, it will reflect that color you just picked. All right, I'm going to give everybody maybe a few more seconds to get that done. Okay. Anybody need me to hold up? Need more time with the material? Everybody got it? All right, so the last thing we need to do, now we have our material, now we need to actually apply it to one of the objects in our game. So I'm going to apply mine to my sphere, but you can apply yours to your plane as well. It's going to be the same process. So I'm going to select my sphere in my game, and I'm going to go to where it says model, and there is a little kind of checkerboard pattern thing right here that says material. Okay, there are a few ways we could select this. I could click the little pen here. I can also come down to my assets and select my materials, and I can drag it over to my properties where it says into that material property field and drop it. Now when I click off, I've now applied that to my sphere. I can do the same thing for my plane if I want. So if I have another material or if I want to apply the same material, I select it, make sure I can see the model section where it says material, and I can drag it and drop it in place. Right? I probably don't want both a green sphere and a green green ground here, but I could. And I can hit play, and I can see it has applied to my game, to my objects here. All right. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, so what we learned our first day making our own game, we learned how to use some of those basic tools and change some of those entity settings, such as the position, rotation, scale. We learned how to add both a collision and a rigid body to an object, as well as the difference between static and dynamic. And we learned how to create a material and how to add it to one of our objects. Okay. Any questions for today? Okay. So with our remaining bit of time here, we only have about 15 minutes left. What we're going to do is I'm going to give you some time for self-exploration. So what that means is if you want to keep playing around in here, you want to make some more materials, you want to just play around some of the settings, you're not going to break anything in here. Okay. And so anything you do, don't worry about it. Worst case scenario, we'll just have to recreate what we had today, or you can fork mine. Not a big deal. Okay. So feel free to play around. You're not going to break it. Change settings. Try to, what happens if I do this? Okay. Now, some of those other options you have during this time is if you have, again, anything game design related. You were looking at one of the books we were reading earlier, and you're like, I want to look more at one of those sections, or I want to scroll through it. You can do that. Okay. If there's another tool you've been working with for game design and you want to spend some time working with that, that's an option. Okay. You're working with graphics and you're like, I want to do more stuff with 2D graphics or 3D graphics. Those are things, right? So anything that is game design related, you're allowed to do. All right. Now we also have, again, in our program folder here, those video links. So if you do want to check out any of these YouTube channels, some of them are tutorials and some of them are just basic game design information, right? So how do you design X, Y kind of thing, right? This thing for a game, or what does a game designer do in this case, right? All those kinds of things. So some of these are things like that. Some of them are like have to do with careers in game design. Okay, so feel free to do that. So we've got only a little bit more than 10 minutes today, but you'll give you time to at least kind of start exploring around a little bit. In the meantime, as you're doing that, if you do need to get some water, go to the bathroom before we go here. I know we're almost done with class, but feel free to do that as well during this time. Okay? All right, any questions? All right, well, I'll be here. I'm going to keep the room open. So if you have questions, feel free to speak up and let me know. And hopefully I can get them answered. And we're going to be continuing to work with this game next week. I'll be making some last-minute announcements before we go here, though, okay? All right, otherwise, you have a little bit of time to do some self-exploration.